Over the last 2 years, the pandemic has created major disruptions in the food industry. From COVID outbreaks to shipping delays to labor shortages, it's been a challenging time to say the least. Despite these hardships, the food supply chain has never truly failed us thanks to the millions who continue to work in food production, distribution, and service. Many of these employees are not public-facing, but instead work behind the scenes with little recognition or gratitude.
The people that bring us our food are often invisible, unrecognized, and don't have an opportunity to tell their own stories.
That's Dr. Robin Metcalf, a lecturer in the College of Natural Sciences at the University of Texas at Austin. Metcalf specializes in the study of food systems design and is the author of the new book, Humans in Our Food. She says that one silver lining of the pandemic is that it opened more people's eyes to the importance of the food supply chain. Remember in spring of 2020 when toilet paper and baker's yeast were flying off the shelves? Entire aisles were picked empty, and there was little variety to choose from. It was chaos, and left many people longing for the boring normalcy of their usual shopping trips. Even today, some markets and restaurants are still dealing with kinks in the supply chain that limit food selection and timely restocks.
People say, well, the supply chain is broken, and I don't think that's a fair assessment. I think it is struggling to adapt using the optimization techniques that it's known for, but amidst numerous blockages, not to mention human behavior, which is highly unpredictable. How is a farmer in Central California going to know that you're going to panic one day and go to the store and buy every head of lettuce that day? That's possible. How is the supply chain going to know that people aren't going to go back to work, or that inflation will happen and fuel prices and people can't unload their ships?
These disruptions in the supply chain, coupled with labor shortages, have ultimately led to rising food costs. Between November 2020 and November 2021, food prices across the board rose by more than 6%, according to the U.S. Department of Labor. Items like meat, poultry, fish, and eggs increased by 12% over the same year. Unfortunately, these elevated prices are expected to continue well into 2022 as the industry struggles with ongoing challenges like the onset of new COVID variants. These pressures affect the lives of about 20 million people working within the U.S. food system that are in some way involved in stocking the items we rely on.
And that's not counting everyone in agriculture. It's not counting everybody working in the seafood business. There isn't really an accurate count of all of the people in the supply chain. And as I traveled around the country and other cities, I realized that they're busy making, and they aren't necessarily the flashy chef or the adorable farmer. These are people who are doing things like making pallets, packing food, driving trucks.
The various roles within the food industry are seemingly endless, and these lesser-known jobs are just as important as the public-facing roles like a grocery store manager or counter butcher.
There's fish skinners. There's people who are working to repair boats for each season. And while it doesn't seem like they're members of our food supply chain, if they didn't do their job, supply chain wouldn't work. There's an amazing number of secondary and third level jobs that the food supply chain depends upon.
The food production pipeline never stops. Across the globe, there are hundreds of millions of people working at any hour of the day, 365 days a year, to help keep our food supply flowing. And each person brings with them a unique viewpoint and story to share from their work. Metcalf recalls one particularly fond food memory from her investigative travels to Istanbul, Turkey in 2013 during a period of political protests in the country.
I was on the hunt to find out how and who was responsible for making a traditional bagel-like item that everybody in Turkey has for breakfast and tea called a simit. And so I was in a bakery for simits, And everybody was busy making Simmets to take to the park where the protests were. And I think one thing that was really visible was the sharing of this iconic food bagel between the police, the protesters, and those that were both, all parts of that protest were, shall we say, breaking bread across the lines with this Simmet. And the Simmet sellers with their small little carts, they have very interesting Turkish carts they sell these Simmets from. And it's just kind of like the power of food to connect us.
Food is a universal connector, bringing people together from all different viewpoints, cultures, and countries. The people who produce and sell this food create it for everyone, not just a specific cluster of people. Metcalf argues that some Americans think of the food industry and tend to lump all workers into the same category, assuming certain stereotypes about the sector.
Surprisingly, I think there's a general sense that these people are somehow exploited by their employers. They're somehow, could they get another job, they would do it, that they're poorly paid, and that they're not well educated. And while some of that might be true for some portion of the people who make our food, I found there to be more examples of people that are a counterexample of that. People who have found this to be their first job in this country that has enabled them to bring their families to the United States and get them into good schools and have a house. That there really are people who do believe in the American dream and do have it as part of their experience.
There's still great opportunity within this industry, but like any field, it's also evolving with the times. In some cases, the pandemic has sped up this change.
People have moved, so they've found new ways to grow things, they found new things to grow, shifted from one product to another product, and I think the makers are finding ways to, whether it's by making meat in a lab, to exploring some of these inside growing systems, to developing high-value niche products.
In the wake of a national labor shortage, a growing number of companies are also moving more towards automation to fill certain jobs.
You see farming robots. You see harvesters that are robots. You see robots working in fast food systems. You see servers disappear and QR codes and touch screens appearing. You see just the advent of technology replacing humans.
In spite of this, looking ahead to the future, Metcalf remains hopeful that people will still find their way into the food industry regardless. But how they get there and the roles they take on may look a little bit different.
One of the things that I do is I teach a course in designing global food systems, and I'm encouraged by the enthusiasm and interest in the students coming into the food system. They want to make a change. They're more technically savvy. So these are new generations that may not provide a continuity between sort of the traditional families that have been in the business, but they're full of life, full of creativity, and I think we'll be in good hands.
To find out more about the U.S. food industry and supply chain and the workers who make up this sector, visit viewpointsradio.org. You can also check out Dr. Robin Metcalf's new book, Humans in Our Food, now available online and in bookstores. For more behind the scenes, search Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by Amira Zaveri. I'm Gary Price. Coming up on Viewpoints.
There are some people who are like, okay, I want a big pile of money because it's going to look pretty. But that's not most people. Most people need to have something in particular that they are working towards.
Is 2022 the year you get your finances in order? Then.
I've done a painting of Bin Laden when he was captured and killed, and that was a big cover.
Meeting the man behind some of the most prominent illustrations of our time. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.